There's a gut-wrenching feeling you get when you realize that your dream is going to die. Quietly, financially. When you open your banking app and stare at the numbers and the maths tell you what you already know. This is failing. You are failing. And the life you left everything for now has an expiry date. I was a year into my new life as a personal trainer and outdoor guide. I'd quit a 6-figure corporate law career, poured everything into building a fitness business, and I was now running out of money. Not slowly or in the abstract, I mean properly, viscerally running out of money. The kind where you sit down one evening and realize you're almost at the end of your runway and that something is going to have to change, and fast. The thing nobody tells you about when following your passion is that it can turn on you. When you realize it can't sustain your life, it stops feeling like freedom. It starts feeling like a countdown. On paper, I had everything before. 6-figure salary, corporate law career, the kind of job people congratulate you for at dinner parties. I left all of it to build a life that felt like mine. And I did build it. I just didn't have the right foundation. This episode is the story I haven't told properly until now. It's not the highlight reel, not the "and then I discovered fire and everything clicked" version. The real one. The one with the failed business, the broken relationship, the nomad years, the slow, winding path back to law through places I never expected, and the moment somewhere in the middle of all of it where I finally understood what financial independence actually means. It's not about the money. It was never about the money. But without the money, none of the rest works. I'm telling you this because if you're listening to this show, there's a good chance you're somewhere on a similar path. Maybe you're in a high-income career wondering if this is it. Maybe you're already building toward your number. Maybe you hit it and you're sitting there thinking, now what? Wherever you are, I've probably been there, and I wish someone had told me what I'm about to tell you. You've built the career, you're building the portfolio, you're close to freedom, so what now? Welcome to Life After Enough, money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. I'm Nick, I'm racing towards early retirement and figuring out who I become when the job no longer dictates what I do with my time. Let's get into it. I became a lawyer because of 2 reasons. 1, I was good at exams. And 2, I was obsessed with Ally McBeal and Legally Blonde. Now, obviously, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but not by much. I like the idea of law, the prestige, the structure, the clear progression, the money. A law degree, training contract, qualification, associate, senior associate, partner track. It was a ladder, and I'm someone who climbs ladders. I think structure was the thing I craved the most. I came from a state school with no real direction, no family blueprint for how to build a career. Law gave me something I'd never had, a clear path forward. First you do this, then you do that. And if you work hard enough, the next step is waiting with open arms. For someone like me, who's a bit obsessive, a bit OCD, about organizing and planning, it was perfect. I didn't just follow the structure, I actually thrived inside of it. And for a while, it worked. It was a really good fit, and I was good at it. I was earning well, I was hitting every milestone I was supposed to hit. From the outside, it looked like I was winning. But here's what winning actually felt like. I'd get a bonus, and I'd feel relieved for about 48 hours and then anxious again. I'd get a promotion and immediately start worrying about the next one. I'd work late, I'd work weekends, I'd miss things, cancel plans, and tell myself it's all temporary, just until I make senior associate, just until I hit this billing target, just until. The just until never ended. It just shapeshifted. And then something happened that I wasn't really prepared for. I qualified. I'd made it, and I'd finally started earning real money after 7 years of study and training. But something else happened. The rigid structure that had carried me through university and training, the one that told me exactly what to do next and when, suddenly fell away. And in its place was this vast, open expanse of time, stretching from now all the way until retirement at 65. No more checkpoints, no more clearly defined next steps, just decades. I remember talking to my best friend about it at the time, and both of us just feeling the same thing. It was absolutely terrifying, numbing even. I'd spent my whole career climbing a ladder with clearly marked rungs, and now someone had pulled the ladder away and said, right, just keep going for 40 years. And I don't want to paint this as some massive sob story because it wasn't. I had a great income, interesting work, smart colleagues, but there was a growing gap between how my life looked and how it felt. And I didn't have the language for that gap yet. I was tired of the hamster wheel. Earn more to spend more. Work harder to afford the lifestyle that work demanded. I didn't know about FIRE back then. I didn't even know there was an alternative. So I did what a lot of high achievers do when they're burnt out and disillusioned. I romanticized about the exact opposite of my current life. It started with mountains. I've talked about this in previous episodes, so I'm not going to go through it all again. But the short version is I started climbing. Mont Blanc first, then the SAS 4000ers, then Mount Rainier. Each summit was a hit of something I wasn't getting at work. Risk, physicality, a goal that had nothing to do with billable hours. I was still based in London, but every weekend I could, I'd disappear into the hills, exploring sporadically, having fun. And for the first time in my adult life, work wasn't my only priority. Something else was creeping in too. My identity was starting to develop another side. Then came Denali, a month-long expedition in Alaska to climb it expedition style. That was the one thing that changed everything. Not because of the audacity of the expedition itself, but because of what a month away from my career did to my head. The training alone was so intense that for the first time in my adult life, my job took a back seat. Something else had my full attention, my full energy, and it gave me room to breathe in a way I didn't even know I needed. I came back and the life I'd been living looked completely different. Smaller somehow. Like I'd been staring at a screen for years and someone had finally opened a window. The hamster wheel felt even more pointless. All of it. Corporate life, the politics, the earn more, spend more cycle. It just seemed like a trap that I'd been sleepwalking through. So I made the leap. I handed in my notice after my return from Alaska and just left the corporate world for what I thought was for good in August 2016. I want to be honest about this part because I think a lot of people listening will recognize the feeling. When I quit, I felt euphoric, like I'd broken out of prison, like I was finally free to live whatever life I wanted to. I had tons of energy and also I was super naive and full of self-belief. Everyone around me was either impressed or horrified, and both reactions felt validating in different ways. Here's where I stood financially when I walked out the door. Some house equity, a small UK pension, and about £35,000 of liquid cash to survive on. That was my runway, and at the time it felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like freedom. I was so gung-ho, so ready for the next chapter that I didn't even stop to question whether 35 grand was actually a viable foundation for a career change. I just felt the weight of it, the fact that I had some money, my own money, enough to walk away. And that feeling was intoxicating. Honestly, I still believe in that, having FU money, even a modest amount. It's one of the most powerful things you can build for yourself. It's what lets you take the leap. It's what gives you courage to bet on yourself when everyone else thinks you're mad. The problem wasn't that I had FU money. The problem was that I had no idea how fast I would run out of it, or what I would do when I did. What I didn't understand yet was that I wasn't running towards something. I was still very much running away from something. And those are very different journeys, even if they start in the same direction. I didn't take a single day off. No decompression, no breathing space. I went straight from handing in my notice at work to enrolling on a personal trainer course. White knuckle speed, running headfirst into the next thing with a burst of youthful exuberance that, looking back, was equal parts inspiring and reckless. By October 2016, barely 2 months after quitting, I launched my new business, a bootcamp and adventure fitness company run out of London. I loved every single minute of it. The programming, the prep, being the instructor, designing the weekend trips. Finally, I was running my own thing. I was in charge of my own life, building something that was mine, not a law firm's, not a client's, mine. I had regulars who would come to every single bootcamp, no matter the weather, a small roster of personal training clients, and people who'd sign up for the weekend hikes. It was small, but it was real, and it felt like proof that I'd made the right call. Then I took a bigger swing. I designed a luxury fitness retreat in Mallorca, poured weeks into marketing, the programming, the logistics, personal chef, yoga. 2 people signed up, and then one of them dropped out. I ran it anyway because what else was I going to do? And honestly, it was a great week. My guests had an amazing time, and now we share a wonderful friendship. Hi, Doug. But I flew home afterwards and did the maths, and the maths didn't lie. I lost about £10,000 on that venture. The accommodation was pre-booked. The bet was already placed. 10 grand. That was massive for me at that point. And here's what I didn't understand about building a business from passion. Passion doesn't necessarily pay invoices. Loving what you do doesn't mean anyone else will pay you to do it, at least not at the rate you need to live. And what was happening in parallel with all of the good stuff in life was that I was very clearly running out of money. Fast. I was still spending like I was the big shot corporate lawyer with a nice paycheck coming in every month. But the reality was very, very different. I was burning through my savings and I had no idea about safe withdrawal rates or financial runways or any of it. I was just too desperate to get out of the corporate world to plan properly. I remember one month in particular, February 2017. I was running 3 boot camps a week, and for 2 straight weeks, nobody showed up. It was cold, it was miserable, and people just stopped coming. I pivoted and ran classes indoors at a local school, but it was painfully slow. I was earning less than £100 a week for a ton of work. The cruelest part was that the financial stress started poisoning the thing I'd left everything for. I couldn't enjoy the outdoors when I was worried about making rent. I couldn't be present with clients when I was calculating how many more sessions I needed just to break even. The dream didn't die dramatically. It died slowly, quietly, one anxious Sunday night at a time. And then the moment I knew, it crept up and then it hit me all at once. After the retreat failed in May 2017, after months of watching the savings drain, I finally did what I've been avoiding. I sat down and looked at the numbers properly, not optimistically, not with the "it will probably be fine" lens, but honestly. And the numbers were brutal. At my current trajectory, the money was going to run out, not in some abstract, distant way, but soon. And after that, I'd be making decisions out of desperation, not because of choice. And desperation is the opposite of freedom. That's when I finally understood something that seems obvious, but at the time felt like a revelation. Following your passion isn't wrong, but doing it without the proper financial infrastructure is what makes it unsustainable. I hadn't failed because my dream was stupid. I'd failed because I'd built a house without any foundations, and then had been surprised when it started sinking. And then, on top of everything else, my relationship fell apart. The breakdown was disconnected from the finances, and I won't go into details because they're not mine alone to share. But what I will say is this: that experience taught me something about money that no spreadsheet ever could. It taught me that financial security isn't just about income. It's also about resilience. It's about having a foundation that doesn't collapse when one part of your life does. I didn't have that. I had a dwindling savings account and a life that was coming apart at multiple seams simultaneously. And I realized, painfully, that I'd been somewhat financially reliant on my partner. Losing that safety net on top of everything else left me exposed in a way that made me, well, furious. Furious at myself for allowing that dependency in the first place. One thing I held on to, though, throughout all of this was a belief that I'd rather try and fail and learn than never try at all and spend the rest of my life filled with regret, what ifs, or resentment. I also knew that I still had a career to fall back on. That knowledge that I had a profession, a qualification, a safety net was one thing that kept the fear from becoming paralyzing. Quick one before we continue. I send a weekly email every Monday morning that goes deeper than the podcast. It's not a recap, it's a separate idea, usually something more personal, plus a question to sit with for the week. It's free, it's one email, and you can sign up at lifeafterenough.com. Link is in the show notes. Okay, back to it. So what happened next? Here's what I didn't do. I didn't call up my old boss and beg for my job back. That's the version of the story that people might expect. And it's not what happened. What happened was quieter and started with a realization. After the retreat, I'd managed to build up a small roster of legal consulting clients to keep some income flowing. The clients were located all around the world. This developed well, and I also managed to pick up a few contracting opportunities at the same time. I had a bit of breathing room and a little bit of runway again. And between the consulting and contract work, I had this thought that changed everything. What if I don't need to be here anymore? Not just here in London, but this version of life, these memories, the version of myself I was trying to outrun. I'd never really had any time off. I had no money to travel at university, and I started work carrying about £30,000 of student debt. So maybe this was my chance. Maybe I could take the consulting work on the road and finally see the world. I was apprehensive. It would mean packing everything up into storage and jumping on a flight to escape. That felt unsettling and scary. But my brother was the one who finally talked me into it. And once that decision was made, the rush of excitement I felt was the first genuinely hopeful thing I'd felt in months. And the countdown had begun. July to December 2018, I joined Hacker Paradise, which is now called the Nomad Collective. It's a community of remote workers and digital nomads. I took my consulting practice on the road. We went to Playa del Carmen in Mexico, Buenos Aires in Argentina, and Canggu and Ubud in Bali. I want to be careful here because this part of the story can sound like an Instagram reel. Lawyer quits job, works from the beach, and lives the dream. It wasn't that clean. The income was very inconsistent. The time zones were brutal. There were weeks where I was doing calls at midnight and then pretending I wasn't exhausted the next morning. But the Nomad chapter was 100% what I needed. I met the best people, fantastic, capable, amazing people. I also got the mental reset that I'd desperately been lacking. And I developed the consulting business to the point where it was self-sustaining. I could pay for today. Tomorrow was less certain. I could sustain the nomad lifestyle without financial pressure, but I was building nothing underneath it. No long-term security, no foundation, just enough for today. But that was fine at that point in time. The part I remember most vividly, though, was arriving in Bali in late October 2018. It was Canggu before it went mad and then on to Ubud. It felt so far away from London, so exotic, so completely different from anything I'd known before. And because of that, so mine. That nomad experience rewired something deep inside me. It planted all of these seeds of what I think of now as my life 2.0. The idea that you could design a life deliberately on your own terms and in places and ways that most people never consider. Those seeds took root and they led directly to what came next. A small law firm I'd been doing overflow work was opening up in Singapore. I talked to them and something clicked. I decided to join and relocate to Singapore properly. It was a super exciting time. A brand new law firm. We were bootstrapping our way into the market. It was fun, scary, entrepreneurial in a way that traditional law had never been. I wasn't going back to a career I'd left. I was actually coming back to the profession through a completely different door. And then COVID hit. And if building a young law firm in normal times is hard, building one during a global pandemic whilst locked in a city-state with closed borders is something entirely different. The marketing work was relentless, the uncertainty was constant, and the emotional toll was absolutely real. But the COVID slowdown was also the time when I found fire. All of those lockdown evenings in Singapore with nothing else to do but think. A blog post led to a podcast, which led to a spreadsheet, and then another spreadsheet. And one evening, I plugged in all of my numbers, my current savings rate, the investment returns, compound growth, and I saw something that stopped me cold. If I stayed the course, if I kept saving at this rate, I wouldn't need to work until 65. I wouldn't need to work until 60. The numbers said I could be financially independent years earlier than I ever could have imagined. I checked 3 times and closed the laptop. I then opened it again and checked a 4th time. This was another seismic shift because what fire meant, when I really let it sink in, was that I could buy my own freedom. Permanently. I would never need to fall back on law again if I didn't want to. I think I was so scarred by the experience before, the failed business, the financial freefall, the dependency on someone else, that the thought of building a safety net which was entirely mine and that could support me for the rest of my life was incredibly appealing. After that breakup in 2017, as I said, I was furious at myself for letting my financial security become so entangled with someone else's. Never again. What I didn't expect, though, was that the first feeling wasn't necessarily excitement. It was something closer to grief, because if this had always been possible, if I'd understood compound interest at age 25 the way I do now, my entire story might have been very different. But grief turned into clarity, and I'd already proven to myself that I could build life on my own terms. I'd done it messily, imperfectly, and very expensively before, so now I had something I'd never had before: a number, a timeline, and a strategy to make it permanent. I knew then that my new life mission was to reach financial independence and be financially safe forever. So during my time at the Singapore law firm, a secondment opportunity came up, a chance to work within a larger organization. And when I ran the numbers on it, not just the financial ones, but the emotional ones, I realized that this was the right move. Nothing glamorous, not a great story for dinner parties, but the thing I actually needed at that time, and that was stability. Financial stability and emotional stability. When they offered me a full-time role, I took it. And I took it with none of the shame I might have felt 5 years earlier. Because this time, I wasn't going back to a career out of failure. I was choosing it with open eyes, knowing exactly what it could give me and exactly what I planned to do with it. Once I had the framework, everything accelerated. I wasn't just working hard. I always worked hard. But now every financial decision ran through a filter. Does this move me closer to my number or further away? It began to feel like a game. I deliberately kept my cost base super low, and I had a housemate. I was sensible with travel and discretionary spending, and then just shoveled money away month after month, 50 to 70% of everything I earned. I tracked net worth monthly with a precision that would have seemed obsessive to anyone who didn't understand why I was doing it or my background. Every milestone, the first 100,000, then 2, then 3, etc. Each one felt like laying another brick in that foundation that I'd never had before. I hit coast-fi without even knowing the term. That's the point where even if you never invest another penny, your existing portfolio will grow to cover a traditional retirement. When I realized I was past that line, something shifted psychologically. The pressure valve released just a little. But here's what surprised me, and honestly, what surprised me about being surprised. Hitting financial milestones didn't make me feel free. Not at least in the way I expected. The number in the spreadsheet kept growing, but the Sunday night anxiety didn't shrink proportionately. I still checked markets too often. I still felt spikes of stress when someone mentioned redundancies at work. I even caught myself calculating whether I could survive a market crash. Life had become a financial optimization game, and that was a new problem. It was all-consuming. I kind of lost myself and broadly my life and interests to a purely financial metric because the money was solving a financial problem, but I had an identity problem as well. And alongside that, a purpose problem. And those don't respond to compound interest. My identity over the previous few years had been shattered piece by piece. The breakup, leaving law, leaving London, the Nomad years, being a mountain climber who wasn't climbing mountains anymore. Each transition had stripped away another layer of who I thought I was. And all I had left was the good with money guy. That was my entire identity. The person who saves aggressively and tracks net worth obsessively. It wasn't enough. Not enough at all. Quick pause. If this episode is sparking something for you, hit follow so you don't miss what's coming next. Feel free to share it with someone who'd love it too. It really helps the show to grow. Let me tell you something uncomfortable about high achievers and financial independence. The closer you get to not needing to work, the more terrifying it becomes, existentially. I started asking myself questions I never had to face before. If I'm not a lawyer, or a personal trainer, or a mountain leader, or a digital nomad, who am I anymore? These sound like luxury problems. I do know that. But they're also very real, and they're the reason a lot of people who could walk away from their careers don't. It's not the money keeping them there, it's the fear of this void. I was afraid of boredom. Specifically, I was afraid that without the constant stimulation of a demanding job, I'd discover that, well, I was boring, that the interesting parts of me were all borrowed from my career or my previous life that I don't live anymore. And without it, well, there'll be nothing underneath. After years of having my identity stripped back to nothing but a savings rate, that fear just felt very real. I was afraid of isolation. The FIRE community talks a lot about escaping the 9 to 5. Nobody talks about what happens when all of your friends are still in it. You're free on a Wednesday afternoon, but everyone else you know is in meetings. Freedom can be lonely if you're the only one who has it. Let's fast forward slightly to 2025. I took a 6-month sabbatical. This time I didn't blow everything up and resign. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. This was a deliberate, time-boxed experiment. I planned it a full year in advance, left work in fantastic shape, made sure handovers were thorough. I wanted zero guilt following me out the door. And my plan was simple. Travel, travel, travel. My husband and I got married in Thailand. We spent time with family in Cambodia, honeymooned in Hawaii, where, by the way, I've never spent so much money on such aggressively average food in my life. Then the UK for a bit, then the big ones, Nepal for the Manaslu circuit, and then New Zealand to finish. 2 proper once-in-a-lifetime trips to bookend the whole thing. By the way, New Zealand delivered on every level. The scale of the landscapes, the hiking, the people, it was everything I'd hoped for and more. I'd go as far as saying that it's my new favorite country. Sadly though, Nepal didn't happen. My husband had a family emergency and the whole leg had to be cancelled. And here's the point where the sabbatical stopped being a holiday and started being something else entirely. The Nepal cancellation left me with an 8-week gap in the middle of the sabbatical. I had no plan, no destination, just this big block of empty time. My first instinct, as always, was to fill it by flying away somewhere, scramble and book another trip, optimize the gap, make every hour in every day count. But nothing was speaking to me. So in the end, I just stayed home in Singapore. And that decision, the decision to stop moving and just be still, was probably the most important one I made during the whole 6 months. I joined a boot camp near home, where 5 mornings a week I went at 9 a.m. and afterwards I'd get a coffee, sit somewhere quiet and just watch the world go by. And in that space, that completely unoptimized, unglamorous, ordinary space, I started working on a podcast idea that I'd been carrying around for years, with no pressure, with no business plan, just curiosity and a voice memo app. But the sabbatical also revealed something I hadn't expected. Without the structure of work, I realized I'd been burnt out for much longer than I thought. I'd normalized a constant low level of stress so thoroughly that I didn't even recognize it as stress anymore. It was just life. Taking that away was like removing a noise you'd stopped hearing, but the silence that came afterwards was disorienting. And here's the uncomfortable part. If you're like me and you don't exactly love your job, you can end up blaming work for everything wrong in your life. But when you take the job away and you're still left with some of the same problems, the restlessness, the need to optimize, the difficulty just being, well, then you realize it's probably not entirely just the job. Some of it is you. On one hand, that hit hard. But on the other hand, it means it's fixable. It's not some external thing you need to escape anymore. It's internal work that you can actually do. So, as I've said before on the podcast, the sabbatical didn't fix me. It was never going to fix me, but it did open my eyes to what needed fixing. And in those slow, ordinary weeks at home, the boot camp and the coffee and the early sketches of what would become this podcast, I got my first real glimpse of what life after enough might actually look like for me. Not a permanent holiday, not an Instagram reel, just time and space. Curiosity without a deadline. And for the first time since university, a period where I wasn't chasing the next milestone. I was just present. Now, here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was frantically adding to my holiday budget at age 27 to keep up with the partners at work, or desperately trying to make a fitness business work at 31, or consulting from a cafe in Buenos Aires at 33, or even navigating the pandemic in Singapore at 35. Money gives you optionality, and that's real, and it matters enormously. The ability to say no to things that drain you, the ability to say yes to things that excite you, and the ability to weather a crisis without it becoming a catastrophe. That's what financial independence actually is. And as I said back in episode 2, enough is not the finish line. It's actually the starting line in all of this. Optionality without identity is kind of like a menu that you can't order from. If you don't know who you are outside of your job, well, financial freedom just gives you more hours to sit with that question. And that can be terrifying. Financial independence is necessary, but it's absolutely not sufficient on its own. You also need to know what you're walking towards, not just what you're walking away from. And that second piece, the purpose piece, the identity piece, that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. You have to build it separately, intentionally and deliberately, and ideally before you need it. The biggest shift for me was moving from escape to contribution. For years, my relationship with money was about escaping the job, escaping the stress, escaping the feeling of being trapped. And escape is a powerful motivator, but it's totally empty once you've achieved it. You've escaped. Well, now what? The now what for me turned out to be this podcast. Not a retirement, not an escape at all, but a contribution. Building something that helps people navigate the hardest part of the enough journey, no matter where you are on that journey, the part that isn't about money at all. So let me be transparent about where I am now, because I think that matters. After everything I've been through, I can now see the finish line, or rather, I can see the starting line. I'm still working, still in corporate law, working with a great team and a great company. I'm still building the financial foundation, but the energy is completely different from a few years ago. I'm not grinding in desperation anymore. I'm building with intention. Every month is a choice I'm making, and it's not a sentence I'm serving. And alongside the day job, I'm building this, Life After Enough, the podcast, the community, the conversations I wish I had access to 5 years ago when I discovered FIRE. But there's a lot of things that still scare me. I'd be lying if I said I had it all figured out. I absolutely don't. I'm scared I'll hit my number and freeze, that the identity crisis I've been preparing for will be bigger than I expect, that I'll stand at the edge of this new life I've been building towards and not know how to step into it. I'm scared that the podcast won't grow, that I'm building something into a void, that the conversations I think are important might not land with enough people to sustain this as a meaningful project. I'm scared of the same thing I've always been scared of, if I'm honest, that the freedom I've been chasing will arrive and I won't know what to do with it. But here's the difference between now and 5 years ago. I know the fear is there. I'm not pretending it isn't, and I'm building systems, the podcast, the reflection, the community, the conversations, to make sure I don't arrive at enough and discover I've got nothing waiting on the other side. What excites me is simpler than I expected. It's the idea that I get to wake up and choose what to work on, who to work with, how to spend a Tuesday, whether to say yes or no to any given thing based on what it adds to my life, not what it adds to my bank balance. And it excites me that I might be able to help other people get there faster, with fewer wrong turns, with the conversations and frameworks I had to find the hard way. So that's my story, or at least the version of it I can tell in 40 minutes. If you're approaching your number and starting to wonder what comes next, or if you've already hit it and feel unexpectedly lost, this is why I'm building this. Because I've been on both sides. The side where money was the problem and the side where money wasn't the problem anymore. And somehow that was its own kind of problem. And I know the maths is the easy part. FIRE isn't about retiring early. It isn't about sitting on a beach. It isn't about never working again. At its best, financial independence is about building a foundation strong enough to hold whatever kind of life you want to put on top of it. But you have to decide what that life looks like, and that's the work most people skip. Here's what I'd ask you to do after this episode. Just one thing. Ask yourself, if money weren't a factor, if enough were already handled, what would you build? If you can answer that question clearly, well, you're further ahead than most people. If you can't, that's not a problem, but that's the real work. And that's what this show is for. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to Life After Enough, a podcast about money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. If this episode made you rethink your future, share it with someone who's starting to question the script too. You can follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Nick, and I'll see you next week as we keep building a life that's truly ours.